Hello there, and thank you for everyone who's joining us for today's webinar about finding an employer with genuine social values. Just before we get started, I'll do a tiny bit of housekeeping here. If you've got questions along the way, please feel free to throw them in the Q&A tab, and we'll get to them at the end. We'll also, as we're going through what we're trying to cover, we will be putting content links into the chat, I guess. So where we're referring to things and there's sort of further reading that you might be interested in, we should be firing those links over. But by all means, if there's something more we refer to and we haven't done a link in there, put it in the Q&A and we'll get that shared. The other part here is we're recording the session, we'll share that recording afterwards. If you have to drop out halfway through and you're leaving on a cliffhanger and you want to know how the story ends, we'll be able to cover that through that recording. So let's crack on with some introductions. Linda, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. I'm the head of talent acquisition, and I joined Scott Logic in 2023, which is actually 2 years ago, which has flown by, may I just add. Previous to here, I worked in retail and healthcare, so very different, however, still very exciting sectors all the same.
Super. And I'm Graham Odds. My title this week, which is a bad joke, but my title this week is Chief Growth Officer. A few weeks ago, it was Chief Strategy Officer. A few weeks before that was probably something else. I actually joined Scott Logic back in 2006 as a graduate, straight out of university. And effectively my entire career has been here in every few weeks a different role, is what I'm alluding to. But it's been everything from sort of as a developer, as a consultant developer on sort of day one, and through to now being one of the directors in the business. One of the things that I have responsibility for is around our sustainability efforts. So everything to do with kind of social value and the like. I represent that at the board and drive that forwards, including our B Corp certification, which is some of the reason we're talking today. But to give you an idea of who we, the business Scott Logic, are, we are about 400 people, a little over 400 people, in fact, at the moment, across 6 offices, all here in the UK. So Newcastle is our headquarters. That's where I joined back in 2006. The company was founded in 2005. You can see on the slide where the other offices are, so I'm not going to just start listing that off. But what we do ultimately is we build custom software for all sorts of different enterprises, generally bigger ones. So that means we're doing kind of the designing, the architecture, the developing, the testing, the delivering, the cracking the handle on making that software a thing for our clients. We also do a whole lot of work around kind of advising and reviewing the kind of technical approaches that our clients take and decisions that they make on the side of actually doing the build side of things. When it comes to who we do this work for, our heritage is very much in financial services, so big multinational banks, exchanges, asset managers, all those kinds of organizations. That's been who we've worked with since day zero of the organization, and still a big part of what we're all about. But also a big deal for us is UK public sector organisations. So we do a lot of work with the Scottish Government, Department for Work and Pensions, HM Land Registry, amongst a whole host of other organisations that impact all of our lives on a day-to-day basis. We also do a whole load of work in and around energy firms, and then there's a long tail of miscellaneous other tech companies, all sorts of different bits and pieces. But the commonality of a lot of the places that we work for and the kinds of systems we work on is that they tend to be these really big, gnarly digital systems, either existing ones that need to be improved or modernized, or building brand new ones. And as you can see on this slide, we like badges. They help us communicate a little bit of who we're about, and that's part of what we're going to get into through this webinar. So in terms of this webinar, when you signed up, you might have seen this sort of GenB label, name, description tagged onto it. So this is referring to Generation B, and ultimately the explanation to that is that's the theme for this year's B Corp month, which takes place in March every single year. So B Corp month is really, it's kind of an awareness raising campaign for the B Corp movement. I will explain more about B Corp further down the line. But it's trying to highlight the positive impact that businesses can have on people and the planet. And Scott Logic became a certified B Corp back in 2023. In fact, I should remember that. Because we felt the movement and a lot of what it stands for, a lot of the good practices it promotes, really aligns with our values and who we are as a company. Now, we're going to talk about some of those values and what that B Corp status means for employees in particular later on in this session. But now let's actually shift to the specific topic of this webinar, and I'll hand over to Linda.
Thanks. So why is it important in terms of finding an employer with social values? Well, interesting, this has got lots of different stats on here, but 61% of Gen Z, so those born between 1997 to 2012, so companies' ethics are just as important as salary, which is a really big percentage. So what we do know is those entering the job market have got a different focus in terms of what's really important for them when they're joining a new organisation or when they're considering a new employer of choice. And I think it's probably really something that I've noticed over the last few years when talking to candidates. They want to make a positive contribution to the local community, and they want their colleagues to be aligned to that as well as the organisation. And we've really started to see that coming through. So these numbers don't surprise me, but something that is really important for people when they're considering joining a new organisation. When we're looking at employee value proposition, it's not just the benefits and the salary, it's also that connection and purpose, the meaning of the organisation, what the purpose of the organisation is. That's really important. And those things are what people are looking for when they are considering a new employer. Just moving on to, so it's really hard, I think, when we're looking at a new job and a new place to work. We've all had friends and family who come to us and say, I've had an interview, but I don't know. And rightfully so, you've got to consider and make an informed decision. And so, you've got a careers website. It's got an awful lot on that organisation's website to tell you about why to join them. Ultimately, they're selling, why you want to work there. So you get a really good lens into that organisation. There'll be lots of information on there for you to consider. And ultimately, the interview process is something that they are looking at in order to assess you as a candidate to make sure they're getting the right person in. But don't be put off by an interview process, because it's also you assessing them, and it's your opportunity to be thinking, do I want to work with these people? They're going to be my colleagues. So the more interviews you have, the more opportunity you get to meet possibly future colleagues and also find out a bit more about them. So it gives you a real opportunity to find out if you feel this is the right organisation. So there's lots of things that you could be looking at in terms of ticking off the boxes, but ultimately you do get a feel. And it's a bit like when our friends or family phone us and say, I've had an interview, we're going to be saying to them, what's your gut feeling? What are you feeling about that opportunity that's coming up? And that isn't going to be any different going forward. So people are making those decisions with informed research behind them, but it's also making sure it's the right company for you. And that can be the hardest bit, making those decisions. So doing all of your homework can definitely help.
Yeah, and one of the tools that's often talked about and presented by companies is company values, really. And that's I guess I think of that in terms of what it's an expression of who the company is or why they are, rather than what they're doing or what the pay might be. Like the kind of the obvious things, let's assume those are the ticks, but employee values are really trying to understand the business, almost like you're trying to understand a person. It's not necessarily about what happens today or what can be stated today. It's more the principles they work to. How do they, how might they make decisions down the line if a circumstance came up? In a case like someone like Scott Logic, or what kind of organizations would they work with, or might they not work with? It's not entirely within our control, but how do you make some of those kind of decisions? And those kind of values, in the same way you start to build up a picture of values of friends or people who become friends, acquaintances, you get a feeling for a business. Now, they'll assert a lot of things. We do, and every other business does as well. You might start talking about purpose and missions and values and all sorts, they are just a way of trying to bring to life who they are as an organization in a rounder sense. So to bring that to life in Scott Logic, we talk about our purpose being to create opportunity and sustainable prosperity through technical innovation. That's a very grand statement. And it's important to be able to pick apart, well, what does that mean in a more day-to-day basis? So one of the things we've done is we talk about our 3 mission pillars, which again, they try and sort of give you a little bit more of that detail. And we have a client mission, an economic mission, and a social mission. And I'm not going to rattle them off, but to bring it, really what it's telling you about Scott Logic is we get pulled in different directions because of the nature of the thing we do, this consultancy work. We don't produce a product, we go and help our clients. We have to be doing something for them. That's part of the purpose we exist for. And we talk about transforming our clients' businesses, promoting good practices, ethical practices, local ones, international ones, all sorts. But there has to be a real focus in how we look at our business and what we do that is geared towards those clients. The economic mission speaks to us as a company and the people who are employed here, right? Because we want to be a sustainable financial organization. We need to exist because it creates that value for everyone in the organization, everyone who's employed here. It means we can support career growth and career development and give people that stable place of employment, which is really important to us. But also the social mission then layers on that we recognize a business plays a role in a community, in a wider society, and towards the planet and safeguarding its future. And those 3 different areas are not all directly interwoven in the work we do. So we call them out as these distinct missions because it gives us 3 different lenses to look at the organization and how we are performing, and that we want to move forwards on all of those in support of that overall purpose. We do also have the more traditional kind of 1-2 word values, as called out here on the slide. And again, I'm not going to just read these off. You can do that yourself. But these values are trying to kind of articulate how we collectively and as individuals behave in the business. But we're also actually pretty conscious that these kind of 1-word values can be pretty ambiguous, and they can be a bit slippery in their use. I've experienced that with some of the clients we work with, where they assert, in fact, some of these same values, and then they don't seem to be there in practice. So when you're interviewing, when you're exploring whether or not an organization is a good fit for you, probe about how these things manifest in the working practices. Like what's the reality to these? Mm-hmm. In our case, we had a lot of employees who challenged us and were, okay, but what does this mean in this circumstance? What does that value mean in this circumstance? And we recognize that these 5 words that we've landed on actually could apply to many other businesses. In fact, we've worked with clients who have at least 4 of these same value assertions. And we wanted to help ourselves and the people who potentially might join our organization to better understand us. Again, trying to describe who we are. And one of the things we devised was what we call our people promise. So this is us trying to outline some really concrete, straightforward principles about how we will operate as a company. It's taking those 1-word values and the sort of sentiment they're trying to express, but turning that into some more concrete assertions about how we will live and breathe as an organization specific to our kind of work. And we frame these in terms of holding, I guess, underpinning a kind of reciprocal promise. It's a thing that the organization commits to as a business, as a sort of an amorphous entity, but it's also what every person in the business is committing to in a different form. But between those two committing to it and operating in certain ways, actually we can live for these things to be true. And we do hold ourselves to account against these assertions, these statements, these principles. We use them to make business and consultancy decisions, and we use them to get challenged. I encourage people sometimes to print out the A4 sheet that we have that explains all these in a little bit more detail and wave it in my face and say, yeah, but how does this thing line up with this part of our people promise program? It's an instigator for conversation. Now, I'll jump on a couple of these, because what I also want to be clear is they're not sort of black and white, hard and fast rules for how we operate. It says we don't expect our people to work overtime. And I've had people call me out and say, yeah, but it says here we don't do overtime. And I have to explain, well, no, it doesn't say we don't do overtime. It is that we operate in a way that doesn't have that as an expectation of our people. Actually, some people do overtime, sometimes because of personal pride, sometimes because of the way that, it might be a release in a piece of software, and actually because they want to get this thing live. They recognize that the way we work with our clients, the expectations, the kind of the way the role works, I'm better off doing that bit of extra time now, and I'll do a bit less another day. And we have that kind of trust in our business because we're not operating in a way that expects people to do these things. So really concrete examples, actually, we've had clients who've wanted to contract in overtime, and we've always, I'd say, fight back and make sure that the clause is that individuals on a case-by-case basis can choose whether or not they can opt in to do overtime. Because some people don't mind, getting paid extra money to sit near a laptop. But that's just one example of, in these statements here, that what they're trying to express is a sort of a direction in an area of grey, but it brings to life how we try to live and breathe as an organization. And these have stood the test of time, because that's another thing you can look for in an organization when they express, whether it's these kind of things, other forms of values, is if they change them. And what happens in more challenging times, how might they suddenly run away from these things? And we've really pushed ourselves that these are things we believe we can hold true forever as Scott Logic operates. But anyway, I think, Linda, you wanted to say a bit more around this.
Yeah, I think they are statements in terms of how we work day to day. And to Graham's point, we do listen to our employees because they do hold us to account. And so if we're not living by those, or they feel that they're in danger of those, then they are the first to tell us. We hire with quality in mind and not quantity. Well, that's true. We do have a robust interview process, but it's because we do want to make sure that we're getting really good colleagues in to work with, and also for our clients as well. So we do have, a focus on making sure that we get the right people into the organisation in terms of their skills that they're bringing, and also the value that they bring to the teams that they're working with. And it's something that we uphold ourselves to deliver and be part of. And what I think is really important about these is they uphold their values that we talked about earlier, but they bring them to life, to Graham's point. And that's something that when you're looking for a new organisation or another employer, is when they've got their values, well, how do they bring them to life? How do they play out day to day and in a real life working scenario? Because it's very easy to have values, but it doesn't necessarily tell you more about what does that actually mean in practical terms. And so that's why I really like our people promise, because actually this is what we live by, and this is what we are measured by, really. And we can change them, but we feel that these are the right ones for us, which is really good. It's a good starting place for you to consider. I think there is workplace awards. So we've got lots of awards. There's lots of different awards to be seen out there when you're looking for a new employer. And ultimately, all of these schemes all work fundamentally in the same way, in the fact that a company can pay to participate. And I think that doesn't necessarily mean to discourage you considering that employer, because what it can mean is that someone's really taken advantage of making change in an organisation. They've improved their policies, they might have changed their processes. So actually, when you go through to participate in a new badge, you ultimately have to fill out quite a chunky application. You've got to showcase all the work that you've done and the changes that you've made. I've had to make some of those in the past. And so actually it can show you that a company's committed to wanting to be an employer of choice, and that they are committed to make those changes and stand by those changes and keep on improving how they operate as an organisation. So it's definitely something to consider, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a great company to work with day to day. It doesn't measure the culture, it doesn't measure the types of people that you're working with, the values or their statements that they might be upholding themselves by. So it's not necessarily the only thing that you want to have a look at, but definitely something to consider. And I think when you're looking for an organisation, if you know someone that works there, that's a great opportunity for you to say, I'm thinking of applying. What's it like there? What's good? What's bad? What's ugly? And get a real insight to what it's like working at that organisation, because ultimately they will give you a very truthful view in, and that might help you make that choice whether or not you make an application, or if you are offered an opportunity, that you take that offer. And I know that we all look at Glassdoor, Indeed and Google because they are great reviews as well. I do it for my holidays, let alone for everything else. We all do, and that's just natural. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it gives you the whole picture. So it's really important that you look at different varying sources when you're making your informed decisions. And those reviews are good, but I would take them with a pinch of salt and don't necessarily think that they are 100% accurate, because they're not always the case. And D&I metrics, well, just like our workplace awards, there's lots of different reports out there. There's lots of different lists in terms of information that is available at our fingertips now, and lots of companies take advantage of sharing this, which is great. When any companies over 250 people in the UK, they have the opportunity to complete a gender pay gap report, for example, for the government each year. And ultimately what this report shows is the difference in pay between men and women. But most importantly, it gives a company the opportunity to share how they might address any inequalities of pay. And that can be the more interesting factor, because if there is some discrepancy in what that looks like, then it's actually what are they going to be doing to close that gap? How are they going to be changing the dial or turning the dial in a different direction? Lots of organisations have broadened this out now to include disability and ethnicity as well, so that can be interesting. Not all companies do this. It's not mandatory, but it's definitely for you to consider if that's important for you. There's other areas that you can look for in terms of resources as well. So apart from what you might see on one company's website, you can also go to more independent websites like Stonewall. They've got their top employers list and they have lots of different reports on there. There's the government main website where they've got lots of different resources that are available as well. So there's different places that you can look depending on what's important for you when you're thinking about an employer. And I think it goes back to what we just mentioned previously, that the metrics don't tell you the whole story. Just getting the top line information from a gender pay gap report or any type of report doesn't necessarily give you what you might want to know. What's important for you might be different from what's important for me when we're looking for a new employer, and that might mean policies. Hybrid working is a really important one that I speak to candidates about all the time. How they work day to day is really important. But there's also family leave, be it paternity, maternity, and other important policies that companies might have in place. And those are things that might be more interesting for you to consider when you're thinking about an employer of choice or moving to a different company. So making sure that you have a look at all of those different avenues when you're making your choices and kind of getting all your information together.
Yeah, and I mean, just to add a little bit more to that, I guess, and the workplace awards thing, it's worth bearing in mind that all of these things, doing all of these things, being able to express metrics, get awards, are an overhead for an organization, right? So if you're looking at a small business that you're evaluating, don't expect them to have all these awards and all these metrics, because it's unrealistic for small businesses to be able to do all these things. They rightly should primarily be focused on existing in the first instance. So a lot of these schemes, all of these metrics are really geared towards larger organizations. And I was just going to say on the metrics point in particular, and gender pay gap is a fun one. Caveat, I'm a massive stats nerd, so apologies for that, but take any metrics with a massive pinch of salt, because stats nerds like me can manipulate them in all sorts of ways. So taking gender pay gap as a really concrete example, easiest way to have really good gender pay gap scoring is to not employ one of the genders. Immediately, you have no gender pay gap by the statistical method that's imposed by the government. So bear those kind of things in mind. So if you're not a stats nerd, maybe don't dig into them, but just also don't take them as golden truth. And actually, one of the areas I was going to jump into specifically around this is to do with kind of ESG and environmental reporting and sustainability metrics. And here I would say almost this is my specialist area, or an area I'm most passionate about. And yes, Logic has a whole lot of badges as a result of that. But you have to. It's almost too easy in some of these immature spaces, and I'd say that environmental and sustainability metrics is one of the most immature spaces across all of these organizational metrics. They're really easy to manipulate and present a very positive front where things aren't always quite as positive as that. So take environmental reporting, and you hear about carbon footprint and greenhouse gas emissions, and all organizations pretty much have consolidated it on a single way of measuring these things. But you can play around with the scope of what's measured. Different requirements from government, different schemes include and exclude different bits. So you really can't just pick and choose, well, what makes us look good. And so you want to be looking for honesty in there. If everything is rosy and they paint a picture of, well, we're going to save the planet tomorrow, that's when I would be really skeptical and start to dig into, well, what does that actually mean? How can that be true that, I'm going to pick on some people here, how can it be true that organizations like Amazon and Microsoft, who are building colossal data centers, are asserting that they're saving the planet? They aren't. They aren't doing excessively bad to it either, but they aren't saving the planet. They are creating colossal data centers which have massive draw on energy and require all sorts of rare earth metals to be mined to be able to produce those pieces, right? That's just a reality to it. So what I always encourage to look at, especially around environmental and sustainability metrics, is what's the story around activity and impact rather than numbers. Look at what's being asserted over time and how that changes. Because if it's the same thing every year, probably not doing a great deal there. So one example that it's not quite the environmental sustainability, but it's a badge where it's worth paying attention to, is actually the Living Wage Foundation as an example. So that badge doesn't just assert that Scott Logic pays the living wage to everyone we employ, but actually all our key suppliers, so all the people that we buy human services from pay the living wage as well, and that goes up every year, right? So it's actually one of those badges that encourages action elsewhere. Things like the Tech Zero badge is about action and activity and being part of working groups that actually make a change in the world. And that brings me on to B Corp. B Corp is it's a lovely badge to have. It's a lovely certification to have. It is a community of amazing organizations on the whole that all align towards particular high standards of environmental and social impact, that believe that business is a force for good. Ultimately, it's a force for change towards better in the world. And there's quite a lot of detail that we could go into there, but we're not going to, simply because there's better resources out there. We'll explain it better to you. But ultimately, what that badge of being a B Corp can testify to you immediately is they have passed a rigorous assessment at a point in time. And one of the areas that gets reviewed in that assessment is about the company's impact on its employees. And so you can actually go and see specifically how they score on that theme and how that might be directly relevant to you. But it is an assessment at a point in time. And they do require you to reassess every 3 years, and you have to improve. So like you actually have to be taking action and being better and better every single time. But it doesn't automatically, as a badge, mean that the company is good, or that a company without the B Corp badge is a bad employer. Right? It just maybe doesn't align with the values of some organizations, and they can still be a wonderful place to work doing good things in the world. But also, just because they've got a B Corp badge doesn't mean that they maybe don't align with the B Corp values. It's actually something that's assessed on the fly. And there were quite a lot of headlines recently because a marketing agency called Havas was stripped of its B Corp status because of a series of complaints and an investigation into some of the work it was doing. And it transpired that a huge amount of its client portfolio was working with Shell, the fossil fuel company, and ultimately doing, I'm just going to simplistically call it greenwashing on their behalf. And that doesn't align with the values of what B Corp stands for. But that doesn't mean there aren't B Corps hiding in there with those kind of things. And ultimately, I guess this is kind of the overarching point, certainly I'm trying to convey, is a lot of things around values can be important to you, but they're different for different people. There's a lot of badges, there's lots of things that feel like they could just be an immediate red flag or green flag, depending on your point of view, about whether or not they align with you. But it's always worth digging a little bit deeper, possibly through the interview process, when you're there asking people on the ground, how is this thing true to you, would be my tip. And I think you've got more on that list.
Yeah, just following on from that, when you're in the interview process, especially if you're working or your interview process is hybrid and you get the opportunity to go into the office, you get a feel and you get to see what it looks like and the people that you're going to be working with. You get like a feeling. You can maybe talk to some of those colleagues as well to find out, to Graham's point, what's it really like to be there? How does that play out? How do those values play out for them? And that can be important for your decision making. So, make sure you use the interview process to your advantage, not just the employer's advantage as well, so that you get that information two ways when you're making your decisions. That's going to be really important. But I think you can make a list and you can definitely tick off what's important for you in terms of the things that you're looking for. And we're all looking for something different when we're looking for a new employer. Ultimately, it's making sure that you get your information across different channels. If you can find out from people actually working there, or maybe they used to work there, that insight is invaluable because it's real life and it gives you that window in from people that you hopefully can trust. Not just the reviews, that is really good to get an inside scoop from looking at reviews, but it doesn't necessarily give you the whole story. And to Graham's point, all the badges, and maybe they don't have any badges, either or doesn't necessarily make them a great place to work or not a great place to work. So that interview process is probably the one place or the one opportunity or two opportunities, if you've got more than one stage, where you can really find out from the people that you're speaking to a bit more about what's great and why they work there. So make sure you take that stage and get as much information as you can. But definitely making those lists are going to be useful. But ultimately, you get a gut feeling, and that gut feeling generally doesn't let you down. So, it might be that you have two opportunities. There's more than one company, and hopefully that is the case for most people looking. But, you'll have all of your things in terms of all your information that you're looking at, your lists, ticking it off. But you might generally get a good feeling about the people that you've met. And that ultimately is why people choose a job. I know from speaking to a lot of people at Scott Logic, for example, the one thing that they all say that keeps them staying in an organisation is actually the people that they work with. So it's not just the client work that they get to do, because I'm not a consultant, so I'm not doing that client work, but I'm supporting from a different perspective. But actually, it's the people that we work with, and that's what makes my day, really positive, because I'm doing that every single day, 5 days a week. And so the people that I work with is really important to me, and that might be important to you as well.
Super. Thanks, Linda. Let's move to some questions, because we've had some good ones come in here. So I'll put the first one to you, Linda, although I think I have an opinion as well. Do you think there are any telltale signs of a potentially bad employer when looking at a career website or job advert?
Oh, interesting. Well, I think a career website or job adverts are two different things. A job advert gives you an overview of the job, but it doesn't tell you every single thing that you're going to be doing. And so sometimes I speak to people that say, I applied for a job, but I'm actually doing something different. So it's really important that you have a look at the job advert, ask for the role description or the role profile, so you can actually find out what you're going to be measured on, but make sure you explore that in the interview. And from a career website perspective, I think it's finding out a little bit more about who are working in the organisation. So I like it when a careers website has a little bit more organic stories from the employees. They're telling you about their journey, maybe how long they've been there, how they've moved to different roles. I think if you can see how somebody's joined and moved on, then that gives you opportunity to say, well, I can start here and I know that someone else has moved. You know, Graham's had lots of roles. I could do some of those roles.
Yeah, I'd echo that. To me, it's really important that there's a sort of authentic human element to what you're seeing on a job advert or a website. I think the moment it becomes too glossy, too bland, too perfect, certainly my skepticism hackles go up, because no place is perfect. No place is totally amazing in every possible way, and so I think some of that, when you can pick up some of that honesty, like if you can pick up a thing that you don't quite like the sound of, or that you don't quite agree with, actually I almost see that as encouraging, because it means the company is confident enough to reveal a bit about itself, that may or may not be relevant, but it is at least as honest about who they are as an organization.
Yeah, definitely.
Cool. Another question we've got is, with the recent trends in the global political climate, for example, moving away from DEI or sustainability efforts, do you see values targeting these areas as a competitive advantage or a potential barrier for clients and or employees? What do you think, Linda? I have opinions. I've got opinions on everything.
Of course you have, of course.
Linda, any thoughts?
I don't see it as being an advantage or necessarily a barrier to clients or for people looking to join a new organisation, because I think it's about being authentic and human and organic with what you do when it comes to D&I, for example. When we're looking at those efforts, I think a lot of organisations have really embraced D&I and what that stands for, and trying to be more inclusive to their employees, and that includes the policies that they do, and it could also be key moments that they celebrate throughout the year. But ultimately being able to do things that are more locally supportive for different offices. You know, for example, Scott Logic have got 5 different offices, or 5 or 6 different locations. So what we might do in Bristol, what's important to the employees in Bristol, might be slightly different to Newcastle or Edinburgh, and they like to be involved in things locally and give back. So I think that's not going to change, because we know that's still really important to people. I just think how it might show up might be different.
Yeah. So I don't see these things in terms of better or worse. Better or worse to me is a totally subjective thing. So it's about where's a good fit. It's a really critical pattern that the people promise that we talk about is that we're not asserting our people promise, and that's what makes us better. That's what makes us who we are, and it is up to you as an individual to decide whether or not that is a better thing because it aligns with you or not. I'm going to go with a horrible thing, but some people only care about lining their own pocket, couldn't give a crap about the world. Fine. That's not going to line brilliantly in Scott Logic, but that doesn't make it better or worse. That just makes it different. They might be looking for an organization that only cares about those things and their values align towards that. It's not on me to judge that decision for that individual. I personally might have a view on whether that's better or worse, but that is for them to make. And so I again, coming back to this authenticity, the human element, to me, there's no point in trying to be the employer that every potential employee ever could want to work with. I want to be clear about who we are and have employees who want to work for the organization that we are, not arrive on our doorstep and then want to change the organization as much as possible, because that's what we exist to do as an organization, is not to change ourselves constantly. We do need to evolve. We need to, that is a part of us continuously improving, but not to be someone we are not. In the same way, you don't go and make friends with someone that you think is horrendous and you want to change them to be more like someone that you like as a friend. More
like yourself.
I always come back to that as the analogy. It's like treat the business as a human. would you want to be a friend with that kind of person? How and where would the issues be? And sometimes I've got friends where politically they're on the other end of the spectrum from where I am. They're still very good friends. We just don't go where that politics stuff might go, and there's certain activities I might not undertake with them. It's as simple as that. Awesome. I think just in considering time, it's probably good for us to call time here. I know there are a couple more questions floating around, but we're going to leave it there, I think. So thank you so much for listening to us blather on for a bit here. Hopefully it was useful for you and provided some insights. If you want to speak about any of this in any more detail, please feel free to reach out to Linda or myself. And go and scrutinize our website, see if it aligns for you or not, and then challenge us on things that you do or don't agree with. That would be much appreciated. We enjoy that.
Yeah, don't mind that at all. That'd be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everyone. We will leave it there.
Thank you. Yeah, have a good day.